Carlos Sainz has been heavily linked to a move to Williams, a team that's looking forward to getting back on track and back into the midfield zone. However, it seems like it's not going to be easy as Vowles imagined it would be, despite him publicly declaring the smooth operator as the number one choice for his team from 2025 onwards. With Sargent's poor performance continuing in Canada, it's very likely that a replacement is on its way. But is this a move a win-win situation for both sides? And what is Sainz's stance on it? It goes without saying that Logan Sargent is one, if not the weakest link in the sport right now. His poor performances continued in Canada, where he crashed on lap 4 and caused a safety car situation.
Oh, car off the road and into the barrier. Logan Sargent with damage to the Williams. The safety car is deployed, and there is Logan Sargent.
Nonetheless, even prior to this crash, his season wasn't anything spectacular either. A best P14 finish in Jeddah is all he can brag about, as is the fact that he outqualified Sergio Perez in the last 2 races, and a total of 5 times in the past 2 years. But what he cannot brag about is how he got outqualified on every race that he and Albon have raced so far, making it a 30-0 score in favour of the Thai-based driver. What Sargent cannot also brag about is the fact that he scored 1 point in his career so far. And don't mind me adding, had it not been for all of the penalties and disqualifications in Austin last year, we would have had a driver who is yet to score points in his second year of racing. That's definitely not the type of driver Williams wants to head into the 2025 season, especially not after finishing P7 last year and grabbing around $30 million in cash prize money that were heavily invested in the infrastructure of the Grove-based squad. This is why James Vowles has publicly named Carlos Sainz as the number one driver that his team is targeting for the 2025 season. And when talking about it in a greater extent, the team principal of Williams went on to say, Sainz is a race-winning driver who last year, against all odds, beat Verstappen in Singapore with a brilliant drive, and that's not the first time. He's intelligent in how he approaches things, logical, and incredibly quick. The number one target for us is Carlos. Williams isn't the same Williams it was 3 years ago, and by the definition of the fact that we've been talking to Carlos, it shows you that we've changed our approach. Now, all of this goes to show that there are a lot of positive changes in Williams, and whether we like it or not, the Grove-based squad is working patiently on returning to the midfield, thanks to hiring some high-profile staff from all over the grid in the past couple of years, primarily from Alpine's recent fallout. Nonetheless, Sainz understands better than anybody else that at this point, this might be the best seat available for him. And while we're not going to see him fight for race victories next year, he'll definitely be a key factor in the 2025 Constructors' Championship if he is to join Williams. The team believes that if they are able to bring Sainz to the squad, he would automatically mount a lot more pressure on Albon to perform, something that hasn't happened in the past 2 years as the Thai driver didn't feel threatened by Sargent at any point of their collaboration. All of this goes to show that the situation in Williams calls for even more changes, with the most visible one being the driver that sits next to Albon. But will this be the right call for Sainz's career? Obviously, the Spaniard knows that he's a high-profile athlete and is desired on the grid, but his options have narrowed down to only 2 teams at this point, Sauber and Williams. Of course, he can hope that Perez will spiral down massively in Red Bull despite receiving a 2-year contract, but even if this scenario happens, that seat would be available from 2026 onwards. Verstappen is nowhere near leaving despite all of the talks being made around him going to Mercedes, and even if this is the case, Red Bull have openly stated that they would be willing to commit to Tsunoda at this point, despite this not being the state that they've had in the past couple of months. All of this prompts a situation in which Sainz will be forced to choose between 1 out of 2 projects that are currently ongoing at Williams and Sauber, with the difference that once Audi kicks in, it's a brand new environment that is yet to prove that they can be competitive in the foreseeable future. On the other hand, Williams is a team with a culture status, and while they're nowhere to be found right now, they're on a steady uprise under the leadership of James Vowles. We've seen what an experienced figure like Ricciardo can bring to a team when it comes to putting the car in the right operating window and pointing out what's wrong with it, something that Williams would kill to have in their rows right now, and something they'll definitely have if they were to join forces with Sainz from 2025 onwards. However, it seems like the Spaniard would need a bit more of a pursuit, as he's still reluctant to share his opinion on whether or not Williams or any other team is the destination for his career. When talking about Valls' positive comments about himself, Sainz went on to say, "I appreciate James's interest and the kind words he's always had towards me. The same can be said about how I feel towards him and his team, but the reality is that I've not yet made up my mind about where I'm going to go next year. Because right now, in my head, I want to focus every weekend on fighting for podiums and wins, so it's very difficult to put your mind into the future when you have such an important weekend coming up all the time." Sainz's mind is definitely in the right place, but with time slowly but surely running out of his spectrum, he might be forced to make a decision sooner rather than later. Obviously, Mercedes has stated that they have no intention of giving the seat to anyone not named Kimi Antonelli, and Sainz's conditions were clear. No contract will be signed unless it guarantees 2 years of driving for that particular team. This might be one of the reasons why he's been heavily linked to Sauber and Williams, because they might be the only teams on the grid that can afford this luxury, as they're looking for a driver who will help them join the midfield and start fighting with the big dogs. Even with this in mind, he's willing to take all of the time in the world when it comes to deciding his next destination. And when talking about it to a greater extent, Sainz went on to say, "I'm going to need some time to sit down with my management and have a conversation with myself and then decide where I want to go. But now there is nothing decided. I don't know if we can wait until the summer break or if the decision will come earlier. I honestly don't know at this point in time." Even though Sainz was and still is in a very close relationship with Audi, the team that is about to take over Sauber from 2026 onwards, the German manufacturer has its own limits and knows that chasing a driver for such a long time is not what they want to present for themselves in the public. While it makes no sense to compare drivers like Ocon and Sainz when it comes to experience and race-winning mentality, the Frenchman is still very high on the list of Audi drivers, as they would be more than willing to pair him up with Hülkenberg. The situation is presented very clearly to Sainz. He's running out of time, and he needs to pick on a project team for himself, which so far seems like something he wants to delay as long as possible, as the media have also criticised his agent for not doing his job properly and not finding him a proper seat in due time. But when we're looking at Sainz's statement, we can understand why this stance towards his manager makes no sense, as the Spaniard himself is looking to see whether a slight opening would come up during the silly season and maybe a hotter seat would come available all of a sudden, with the chances of this happening being slim to zero. Well, with all this in mind, where do you think Sainz will end up in 2025? And more importantly, do you think that Williams is the right choice for his career, despite Sainz's behaviour waiting as long as he can to reveal his future in the sport? Let us know in the comments down below.